Welcome to another episode of Euphoric the Podcast. We have such a juicy conversation today because I'm going to dive into the research of what the difference is between a wannabe entrepreneur and a successful one. Now, this isn't my opinion. This isn't anecdotal. This comes from academic research that I poured into that I want to share with you today. Where did this research come from? So if you've heard of Dr. Benjamin Hardy, you might have heard of him because he's a best-selling author. This is actually what he wrote his thesis on. And I can't wait to unpack some of the biggest lessons that he found from these really big studies that he would do with, other entrepreneurs or people who wanted to start a business. Now, if you don't know who Benjamin Hardy is, he is an organizational psychologist. And basically what that means is studying the health of organizations, especially the health of businesses and how to, grow economies and stuff like that. And what's fascinating about his work is that he's partnered with so many different business leaders to write really great bestsellers. So, for example, one of his top bestsellers is called 10x is Easier Than 2x. Maybe you've heard of that book. It's all about how you can really quantum leap your future trajectory by stop thinking about how you can just make incremental improvements to something and think of it almost in a completely new way, like a 10x way, right? He also wrote the book, Personality Isn't Permanent, Be Your Future Self Now. So it's not just business books he writes, he also writes personal development books. I love Be Your Future Self Now. I highly recommend you get that book if you haven't read it yet. It will change your mind and perspective on so many things and just give you so much incredible data, but also motivation to move forward and just not believe that your past personality has any bearing on who you're able to become in the future, which is really cool because it's a science. He's not telling you out of it just motivational self-help kind of talk. He's talking out of it from the science and the studies, which I think is just so interesting. So I unpacked and basically went through Dr. Benjamin Hardy's whole thesis, which is really fascinating to me because it was really academic. It brought me back to when I was in grad school and I was working also in a business school when, academics was all around me. And I've definitely learned to speak very differently because, now you kind of target just a normal audience and you speak in normal language. But his thesis really brought me back to that academic language and that way of really creating studies and really finding evidence and proof of certain hypotheses and stuff like that. And so basically, his study wasn't called What's the Difference Between Wannabe Entrepreneurs and Real Successful Ones, but that's essentially what he was trying to prove. What's the difference between someone who just wants to start a business but never really gets going and someone who actually does and is successful at it? And so what happens is that he called this study, Does It Take Courage to Start a Business? And it was a fascinating kind of hypothesis because I think he originally thought that some people maybe have more courage than others. And what was interesting about that is that every person who was part of the study, and I think it was over, I'm not sure right now, I don't have it written down, but maybe over 900 subjects or so, everybody thought it was important to have courage. So, and most people don't like to say oh no, I'm not someone who doesn't have courage, right? And so what happened in the study is that he basically was able to use the common kind of nomenclature of how people speak of entrepreneurs. He had a common definition of what an entrepreneur was. And mostly what this meant is that you start and form your own business. So you're not working as a branch manager or salesperson for a different company. It's your own company that you start. And then he had different definitions of what stage you're in the process of starting a business. And so what's really interesting is he didn't call it wannabe entrepreneurs, he called it latent entrepreneurs. So this is a group of people who have decided that they would prefer to have their own business. So, obviously when you look at a large percentage of, people out there in the world, a lot of people want to be employed by a company or employer. And, if you're listening to this and that's you, that's amazing, right? If that's what is your, biggest drive and you love that kind of environment, then that's amazing. But some people don't really like that. Some people really like a sense of independence, a sense of freedom, a sense of autonomy. And it was in fact in the study that he mentioned that people who have a high need of independence and a high need of achievement are more likely to become entrepreneurs than people who don't have those needs. So for example, someone who has a high need for cooperation and collaboration might not become an entrepreneur because they see it as a more solo, lonely route versus in their companies, they can form teams and, have so much collaboration and stuff like that. So he really did find that people who value independence, and I think independence in the sense of first of all, you're able to do what you want. And I think that's a really good word for it is autonomy, having just full autonomy to do what you want. So many of us can identify that. So many of us who are I don't like having a boss, or I don't like being told that I have to be at these meetings, or I don't like being assigned to projects that I'm not passionate about. You know what I mean? It's like that sense of autonomy, down to even like, I want to control my travel schedule. I don't want to have to ask my boss for time off. I don't want to have to like feel micromanaged, you know, like down to even that level, obviously. So people who are more likely to start businesses definitely value independence more than other people. And what's interesting is, from other statistics I've read, 50% and I think it's around 50% of people, at least in the United States, want to start a business. That's a pretty high percentage. So it actually, latent entrepreneurs, meaning people who want to start a business but haven't yet, is actually a huge demographic in our country. And this means people who, again, would prefer to perhaps have their own business than be employed by a company, not counting people who just are fine working with a company, but they haven't necessarily started or done anything yet. That's why they're called latent entrepreneurs, right? And then what he called the next group of people is nascent entrepreneur. And a nascent entrepreneur is someone who has already started building this company. It might not be already completely like implemented. It might not already be making money yet. It might not be at that stages, but they've already taken some steps forward. So maybe they've written a business plan. Maybe they have their website up. Maybe they've taken out a loan. Maybe they've already secured a lease on a building or something like that. So they're taking those startup kind of steps that you would take to launch a business. And then when he looked at like actual entrepreneurs who are, you know, kind of full-time entrepreneurs or long-term entrepreneurs, those are people he considered who are already running a business, basically. And then he would also look at how long that would sustain and how long people were in it for, because there was also a group of people he identified as hobbyists, meaning that you're kind of like, I hate to use this example because I don't want it to be demeaning, but like, oh, I'm just gonna have like an Etsy store and kind of do it on the side, you know what I mean? Like, that's a hobbyist. Or I'm just gonna sell some eggs that my chickens made on a farmer's market, you know? It's kind of something you're just doing on the side. And that's obviously okay if it's for fun and that's what your goal is, you know? But that was kind of a difference maker that he made as well in these groups. And so it's really interesting in these other statistics that I've read as well, is that around 50%-ish of the population wants to start a business in the United States. Only 7% actually do. That is pretty low of a statistic, meaning a lot of people get stuck in this latent entrepreneur stage, meaning they want to move forward, but something holds them back. So basically the paper is really trying to understand that, and the study that was formed around this was really trying to understand what is holding people back. They have the desire to start a business, but something is stopping them along the way. So it looked at risk aversion and people who are more prone to just taking risks, because obviously the more you think that a business is going to be a risky endeavor, the more that you might not go for it, right? So you might want to go for it, but if you're scared or you have a lot of fear or you don't think it's going to work out, that's going to be a big thing that might hold you back. And so he looked at risk aversion, and definitely people who start businesses and are more successful entrepreneurs have more risk tolerance. Like, they're willing to do something where they don't know the outcome and they don't have certainty around that, but they have a lot of faith, they have a lot of hope, they have a lot of positivity, and they have confidence. They might not have confidence in the sense that they know everything will work out from day one. It's not that type of confidence, but confidence in the long run, right? In the long run, that if I persevere, if I'm consistent, this will work out for me, which I think is really fascinating to look at that way. And so then what happened is that obviously this risk tolerance is bigger in a group of people who actually are more nascent and more successful entrepreneurs between the latent ones, is what he found, and his colleagues. I'm sure the paper was co-authored as well with some other people. And they also found that people who don't end up start businesses that want to, they, instead of valuing independence and a need for achievement, they value job security above all else, right? And so when people value job security, they're less likely to start a business, and they're more risk averse, meaning they're less likely to take a risk when they don't know what the outcome of that is going to be. So those are kind of these characteristics that they were able to measure through their studies, which was really, really interesting. And so they also found something that's really cool that I love, because I'm a coach and I know how effective coaching is. They found in their study that coaching enhances courage and motivation to start a business. So if you are an individual working with a coach, you will be so much more likely to work through some of those things like fear and doubt and the risk aversion into actually listening to your bigger dreams and having faith and having hope and having that positive outlook on it. So I thought that was really, really cool that that was statistically measured, because there's a lot lot of studies that show how powerful and effective coaching is. And, it's not some intangible thing. Like, it truly can be scientifically proven that working with a coach is going to be so much more effective for your career, for your business, for your general well-being and happiness and fulfillment. So anyone who needed a little bit more of a nudge to finally take up some one-on-one coaching, I haven't not worked with a one-on-one coach in 6 years. Like, it has been a lifesaver for me, and it's definitely one of the reasons why I credit where I am, is because I literally have someone, my coach says this, actually, it's really funny, I have someone I can go into the closet and cry to. Seriously, right? I can go have the worst day in the world and have someone who's going to hold space for me and see my highest self and my biggest vision. I also have someone who I can celebrate my biggest day and be super excited about, and she'll know that I'm going to the next level. Like, coaching really does work in that way, especially when you're working with a well-trained coach, which is so important. And that's why we have the 5X certification, to just ensure that there's more well-trained coaches out there. So I love that. Okay, so then studying kind of this difference between the nascent entrepreneur and the latent ones, basically there's this stage, again, where you're more of the wannabe entrepreneur. You would prefer to have your own business, but you aren't really making that much steps or inroads on it. They found in this study that that's actually a really long process, that's not something that someone sits in for like a month. Like, the decision of the point when you make, I know I would rather be self-employed than working for an employer, versus the time that you actually start your business and get going on it, can actually be really quite long. And that's interesting, because I look back at my journey and it's almost as if I knew deep down I would prefer to be my own boss. Like, that was always really clear to me, I think. I hated having a boss. Like, oh my God, when I first started at work, like, as I got older and as I got more promotions and like worked up in the workforce, I had more freedom and leeway and stuff. But when I first started at the very bottom, like, do you guys remember that, when you were like on the hour and you had to be there like exactly on time, and you weren't allowed to have more than like a 30-minute lunch and just like stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, that drove me nuts, and then having 10 days off or 5 days off a year, like, come on, right? I remember I worked one of my first jobs is my mortgage company job where I met my husband. So I knew that the universe put me in that job because it was one of the worst jobs I've ever had. But I know the universe put me there so I could meet my husband. So that's a really nice story. But I remember that we had to work on Christmas Eve. And in my tradition, in my family, Christmas Eve is like the biggest day of the year. Like, it's bigger than Christmas Day. And like, it's so big. My mom does 13 different courses. It's like this whole Catholic thing where you just do courses after courses. They're all non-meat. They're more fish-based, or more like sauerkraut and mushroom is what we do in Poland and stuff like that. It is some of the dishes we never have that year. And we open presents that day. And it's a really special thing. It's just like, it's probably the most important day of the year in my family, at least. And this job was like, you have to work on Christmas Eve, right? And you don't get off until like 5 p.m. or 5:30. And then like, my parents lived like an hour away, and then with traffic and all that kind of stuff, like, oh my God, it was horrible. So anyway, I, even from way back when I started working, knew I didn't like the system. Like, I didn't want to play with that. But I don't think I ever knew how. Like, there was a part of me that obviously wanted to be independent and have my own business, but I just didn't see the roadmap to that. And I didn't know very many entrepreneurs back then. And I think once I started seeing some of my friends, I had 2 friends who started businesses when I was still employed, I started to kind of see it more. And, Instagram and like social media, it was around, but I wasn't using it for that reason. So I didn't really see entrepreneurship on social media back then. I just saw updates from friends and stuff like that. So like, I didn't see a clear roadmap. So I think my desire to be an entrepreneur was probably really deep down there in my heart for a long time. But since I had no idea like what to do or how to do it, I wasn't really vocal about it. And I definitely wasn't probably telling myself that truth for very long. And I remember I was actually in my MBA program. So I worked at a business school, a top business school at a top university, and I was able to get my MBA there as well. And that's like when I was a liberal arts major. So I majored in English and art history. I have a master's in English, actually. And so it was in this business MBA program that I really started to like wrap my mind around like what it takes to like, be a top business leader in business. And most of the classes are really geared, in any MBA program almost out there, they're really geared to helping you land a corporate job. It's not really setting you up to be an entrepreneur necessarily. There's some exceptions to that, obviously, but just in general. However, I did have a few classes that were planting the seeds of like, if you were to launch your own company, what would it be? And I had no idea. Like, oh my God, my brain was like, I don't know, like brewery in Mexico, because obviously I was drinking back then, pre-cooked grains or something like that. Like, I didn't know, I wanted to make an impact, obviously. And even when I thought of like a brewery in Mexico, I was thinking of something where like it's some kind of co-op where it's like giving back to like the local community and employing people from the local community and maybe selling crafts from the local community or something like that. So social impact was always really important for me, but I couldn't wrap my mind around the thing. And so I knew that I wanted to do it, and it wasn't really until I went alcohol free that the thing like landed on my lap. When I went through my own transformation, I knew I had to share with other people. I knew that at this point, this is something that is such an incredible gift, such an incredible life transformation. I have to share it. And I probably didn't ever think of being a coach before, although I did like to read books by other authors and other thought leaders. And I did like I like the thought of giving advice to people. Because even back when I was a drinker, like I had already gotten better at my health and I had already gotten better at mindfulness. I already knew things that like people might not know that I would love to have given advice on. But I also felt like a hypocrite back then, because then I would still overdrink on the weekends, and then, what good is my advice now, right? So it's like not only when I went alcohol free did I actually have something to share, but I also felt completely congruent in my ability to be someone who has the integrity to say that like, yeah, I know some things that have worked for me and I think they'll work for you. Like, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have a PhD in the change. You just have to have that sense of like, I believe in this change. I believe in this transformation. I went through it and I can share a little bit about what that looked like for me if it's going to help you as well. And then obviously getting trained properly in coaching is going to, make the whole difference. And I've gotten multiple certifications for that reason. My first certification actually wasn't as long as I would like it to be. So I actually enrolled in a more intensive program and then a more intensive program because I just love the learning, and this is my career. This is what I'm doing for my life. So I want to be on top of it. I want to be the best I can be at coaching for that reason. So kind of in my story, it's hard to kind of ascertain how long I wanted to own a business. Probably knowing that I didn't want to work for someone else was decade, but then probably it wasn't until I got in my MBA program that I actually started wrapping my mind around it. And then when I went alcohol free, then it was like crystal clear, like, let's go, let's launch this business already. So I thought that was really interesting, because if you're listening to this and you're in that long process, it doesn't mean that entrepreneurship isn't for you. It actually means that statistically, it's just normal to have that be an incubator of a process where you actually do have to think it through a little bit. Okay. This is what I found. It was one of the most fascinating parts of what the study uncovered, because basically they were trying to prove like, okay, there's all these people who want to start a business. Obviously, that's like a good majority, half of at least the population want to start a business. Most people don't start a business though and actually go forward and implement. So what's holding these people back? What's, the different things? We talked about courage a little bit. We talked about risk aversion a little bit. We talked about the sense of having more positivity, more faith, and more hope is obviously on the side of people who actually start businesses versus people who don't. But here is what the kicker was of the study. The big thesis that really was arrived at is that they found in their research that there is a point of no return. So what this means in, aviation vocabulary, a point of no return means usually, I believe, when a plane is going so fast on a runway that it can't stop anymore. It has to take off. It has to go up into the sky. Like, like once you reach that point, you're going up or not, right? So this is kind of like that trajectory of like, once you reach this point, you're going to keep going and going and going and going. Nothing's going to stop you, at least not something small, right? And they found very interesting that every entrepreneur has gone through this point of no return, especially from going from someone who wants to start a business or someone who's dabbling in it or someone who's just doing it kind of on the side or a hobbyist, like all these things that they use different terms to describe people who are kind of into it, but not like all the way into it, versus people who are like, yes, I am an entrepreneur full time. This is what I'm doing. Even not necessarily full time by hours, but just by like the heart of it, right? Like your heart's fully in it. I'm going, let's do this. Let's make this happen. So they found that the point of no return into successful entrepreneurship is the moment that someone makes a big investment into their business. So when someone, for example, invested in a lot of goods, like if you bought $10,000 worth of goods that you're meant to sell now through your business, Or they found a lot of times it was in education and training. When someone bought a course or a program or a certification, that was the point of no return, where they just put that money where their mouth is and actually started to work on that business instead of being in that wannabe camp, in that latent camp. I found that so fascinating, because then I look back on my business and I'm like, wow, at what point was it a point of no return for me? And at first, even though my heart and my vision was so big for what I wanted to create with Euphoric, I was still really timid and I was really slow. And even buying my first $20 website gave me anxiety. Like, ooh, what if I buy this website and never use it? Meanwhile, $20 at a brewery, doesn't matter to me at all. You know what I mean? It's so ironic. But I think that once that happened, when I started investing in my business, when I got my first certification and then my second one, when I started investing into business programs, I wasn't just doing it on the side anymore. And within a matter of months of investing at that level, I actually quit my job. That's what they found with another point of return was. Not that I recommend that someone quits their job at the outset of starting a company. It depends on what your plans are and what you want to do and how much your time is needed. But that they also found in the study was a point of no return. That when you quit your job, your day job, you're all in on your business. And it's just so fascinating to me, because sometimes I'll get messages from really new entrepreneurs, and they've heard that I've taken a program with this business mentor, or maybe a Tony Robbins program I did once, and I'm on the testimonial page. So these random people sometimes will reach out to me and they'll be like, yeah, I'm thinking of starting a business, I'm thinking of doing this program, do you think it was worth it, do you think it was a good program? And I know they're looking for that vote of just a vote of confidence and recommendation whether or not it's a good program. But I'm thinking to myself, wait, you want to start a business, but you're not sure if you should actually invest in the training to learn how to start a business? What are you waiting for? If you say you really want this, yes, the program's going to help you, right? And all programs like that are probably really going to help you. And unless they have really bad reviews, most programs will help you get to a further level than you were before you took it. And it almost makes me just kind of laugh a little bit of this is kind of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. We, especially in the online world, we don't have all these huge upfront costs in a point of no return, for example. I didn't have to go lease an office or an office space. I didn't have to go spend multiple thousands of dollars on equipment. I didn't have to go spend and hire 10 employees out of the gate to help run this business. Even think of a brick and mortar. You need employees right away. There's no way that you can manage a brick and mortar 24/7 yourself. And so there's all these other instances and all these other companies where making an investment in your company is what you have to do. You have to put capital into it, whether you put your own capital into it, whether you get a loan, whether you ask family and friends, or whether you're going the route of actually getting more bigger capital, from venture capitalists and angel investors. Every business has to have some starting working capital to invest in it. And most businesses that are not online, they actually require that really upfront. I mean, think about it. If you wanted to, if I wanted to go with my little brewery idea and I needed to get the stills, the distillers, the brewing equipment, the location, that would have probably been a $400,000 investment up front just to get the business started, just to have product to begin with, right? Not that I'm, espousing brewing companies or anything like that, but it's just something to think about. I didn't have to do that in the online world. I didn't have to, again, invest in online, space, because I have just the website. It's a $20 website, or, maybe $100 a year or something like that to manage it. There's a little bit of that upfront cost, but it's really nothing compared to what, a true brick and mortar business or a true software company or a true big firm out there in the world would have to spend on the outset. So for us as online businesses, our education and training, whether it's a certification or a business program or a business mastermind, that is where our upfront costs are going to be. Because how are you going to know how to grow a business if you don't learn how to do that? If you're shooting yourself in the foot from the very get-go. And so I found that really interesting, because once I started investing in my business in that way, even when I still had the day job, it was just a matter of time. It was a matter of time before my business exploded and I was going to leave that job. And I think it was just a matter of a few months that I was okay, let's go, let's make this happen. And my heart was always in it. But I think when you really start, when you really form your first business bank account, when you get your first business credit card, when you get your first VA, for example. So that is maybe a cost that is associated with online businesses, is team, but it's not that big usually. It's not like hiring a W-2 employee for 40 hours a week. It's like a few hours here and there at first, especially with you when you get a virtual assistant. And that usually doesn't happen until a few months, if not a few even years down the line anyway, right? But all of that stuff makes it real. Like, it truly does. Like, you're not backing out. You're not just doing this thing as a hobby. You're not doing it on the side. You don't feel like working on your business. Well, too bad. Like, you already have enough skin in the game to make you show up. Plus, it makes it feel really exciting that things are actually really happening for you and that you're actually moving forward. And this isn't just some dream in your heart. And so it's so funny that out of like the 90 subjects studied and how the way that they were able to put this study together, that really the biggest difference between a successful entrepreneur and a wannabe entrepreneur is what they invest into their business. Is that point of no return, that once you make an investment into your business, you're all in. You're going to go for it. You're going to make this a success, and you're going to actually implement everything that you need to implement to be a successful entrepreneur. Really, really cool. Really, really cool. So that was really, really interesting. Some other things that came up was just that people who are described as that, wannabe entrepreneur, latent entrepreneur, nascent entrepreneur, or hobbyist, they're less committed. And obviously, whether or not that's a personality trait, I don't think so. I think it's just that they haven't reached that point of no return yet. You know what I mean? Like, when I really want to do something, for example, I'm still a human. I still procrastinate. I want to write a second book, and the only way I'm going to write a second book is if I actually tell people I'm going to do that. You know what I mean? So like, that's an example of a point of no return where you declare something to not just the universe, to like other people, and other people are expecting it too. And when I invest in like my book coach and I invest in my book proposal programs, like, you better bet I am going to finish that project and actually write that book or that book proposal. They also found that more people who actually start businesses are more likely to be men. And I think that feels maybe typical, that like entrepreneurship usually caters to more men, especially more in that traditional sense of the bravado and the courage. But I also thought that kind of sucked. Like, I also was kind of hoping that the statistic would change by now, that like it would be equal at least, you know what I mean? Because I do think that like women have these brilliant ideas and this brilliant magnetism, and like have so much nurturing and love to change the world, and have brilliant business ideas and have brilliant ways of sharing their gifts with the world. And the fact that we're not launching businesses and that we're staying stuck in that wannabe phase, like that kind of sucked. That kind of sucked to see. So I hope to change that. And I hope that this conversation is, motivating to change that. I hope that some of my other content around that is motivating to change that too, because I think that's really important as well, that we all have an equal opportunity to share our gifts with the world. And, if more companies were run by like heart-centered women that, truly have that nurturing and that truly that sense of balance, and not just the sense of like, let's mow everything down. I'm watching the Uber series right now on Netflix. It's just the story about Uber and how the company started and the CEO. And spoiler alert, he's kind of a dick. Like, he's kind of a horrible person. And it's a fascinating show because it's cool to see like what goes into launching a business at that scale. But at the end of the day, like, he's not a good person. And I just feel like, not to say that men versus women about being good people or not, but it's just that like oftentimes women have such big hearts, they take care of everyone, that they put their business dreams last. And I just wonder what kind of world we'd have and what kind of companies we'd have in the world if it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? So that was really cool. They also found in the study that I already talked a little bit about, entrepreneurs need more independence and a need for achievement. So they might not feel that they can really rung up as much achievement in a current and a normal employership type of relationship as they want to. And I love that because it's kind of that need for significance. And I definitely have that myself. I know that that's a big driver of mine, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. That need for significance, that need to be important, that need to have accolades, that definitely does drive entrepreneurship. But also self-realization. And so the study goes into talking a little bit about Maslow's pyramid or hierarchy of needs, really saying that, once our basic needs are met, we all want to self-realize. We all want to become our best selves on this planet. We all want to become our highest potential. And that is a really big driver towards entrepreneurship. And that is how a lot of times people do fulfill that need. So I thought that was really interesting too, because I've worked with so many incredible people to start and grow their businesses. And it's definitely this sense of like, well, if I'm unstoppable and I believe in myself truly and I think I can do anything, then why wouldn't I like have my own business, you know? And oftentimes the doubts and the fears and all the imposter syndrome still creeps in, but it's almost like a power flex of like, why not? Like, why not me? You know what I mean? And for me, that really didn't come until I went alcohol free to really recognize that. So I think this study and this thesis was really, really cool to kind of dive into. I wonder what some of your favorite takeaways are from this. I love Benjamin Hardy's work. I haven't read all of his books yet, but I really love Be Your Future Self Now. Like that was a big one I recommend. It's not just a business book, it's for personal development. And I love to see some of these things that, you know, we kind of see anecdotally, like actually quantified in studies and given terms and parameters and like, you know, using a lot of subjects to be able to test this kind of data and stuff with. So if you found this episode interesting, I'll definitely be back with more of that kind of stuff. But I found this fascinating and I just wonder, what's your point of no return? And are you ready to cross that point so that you just keep going up, up, up and up and really take your dreams to the next level versus being that person who's just dipping the toe in the water? Because that I think sucks. And that place to be, like when you know you want something but you're not going for it, like that is painful, honestly. Hope this was a helpful episode and I'll see you next week.